All right, welcome to Building the ServiceNow Slack app with Roo Harrigan and Silas Smith. Thanks. Cool.
Okay, let's go for it.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Roo Harrigan. I'm an engineer on the platform team at Slack. And right now I work on a team that is concerned with building tools to support developers creating rich interactive experiences in their apps in Slack.
And I'm Silas Smith. I'm with ServiceNow. I've just switched to a new role focusing on IoT, or the Internet of Things. Before this, I was with our platform development team for about 4 years. I worked on things like our API capabilities, our integrations, web APIs, scripted REST APIs, the REST API Explorer, as well as our authentication team. So we're here today to talk about Slack. We're kind of assuming that everybody that's here is well aware of Slack. I'm actually kind of curious, how many of you here right now, right this minute, are using Slack on your laptop? That's about what I expected. Slack is this great tool that has permeated our work lives and how we communicate and collaborate with our team members. Slack apps are a great way to enrich that communication and collaboration experience with deep tie-ins with the systems that you're using for work, like ServiceNow. You're going to learn about a new feature that we worked on together called Blueprint Applications. This is a feature that we partnered with Slack together to build. And because this is ServiceNow and we built a Slack app, you're also going to get to see a little bit of our new Now Actions app, which is coming in the London release. So we wanted to start with, why are we standing on stage together? Why are ServiceNow and Slack here today? You might recall that in September at Slack's Frontiers conference, we announced a partnership. And we did this because we realized that we had a shared problem to solve and that we could solve together. But I do have to say that this is kind of like my first time ever being involved, like when a partnership between two companies was being formed. I'd been involved working with a lot of our partners over the years, but I was involved right from the get-go during the forming. And I have to say that it felt a lot like online dating, where you kind of exchange some emails at first, you're getting a feel for each other, trying to see what each other's about. Maybe you have a phone call or two.
But eventually, the day comes when you have to sign each other's NDAs and meet in person. And for us, on the Slack side, we made a big enterprise push last year with our launch of Grid, our enterprise product. And we were on the hunt for an enterprise partner to develop the feature we're about to explain to you. But we were, during our first meeting, the teams were trying to feel each other out and make sure that we had the same, shared goals for our end users. And it quickly became apparent that we were both looking for a first-in-class install experience, just as simple as any other regular Slack app or app install from the ServiceNow platform. So once we determined that we were aligned, ServiceNow emerged as the perfect partner for this feature. Oh yeah, give me the clicky. All right, so in case you are not as familiar with the Slack platform, I just want to take a second to spiel to you about what you could build on the Slack platform. We call Slack a collaboration hub, a place where you come to talk with your team and share files, pieces of information about what you're working on together. And the Slack platform kind of makes the goal of having a single place for communication a reality by allowing you to plug different tools that you use throughout your working life into a single location. So what can a Slack app do? Well, anything from a simple incoming webhook notification, like this one, event happens outside of Slack and you push some text into it, up to through more of an interactive experience. You see some buttons on the bottom here. We also allow for things like slash commands. If you're an IRC user, you'd be familiar with that. All the way up through a rich, more conversational interaction, like a bot. And here in this quick video, you see a flow we're going to show you again in more detail, where a user messages the Now Actions app, receives a prompt to click to authenticate, and then gets a confirmation that they are in fact authenticated. Great. So if you were looking to install an app on your team, you'd start by heading to the Slack app directory. And this sort of brings me to the first architectural point of the talk, which is what actually makes up a Slack app. So if you're a developer and you're heading over to the api.slack.com set of documentation to begin building your app, one of the first things you'll do is provision yourself a new set of credentials. So notably, you'll get a token from us allowing you to call different API endpoints. And that's represented up in the top right-hand corner where you fill out both your configuration and get your credentials. So those are the things that Slack provisions you as a developer when you want to build an app. But writing the code and hosting it is up to you. You pop it up on whatever hosting provider you prefer. So when a user interacts with your app, let's say they type into the Slack client like we just saw in that interactive messages scenario, they type into the Slack client, they say hi to your bot. That actually goes through the Slack API, and then we call out to your code wherever it might be, and then send you events about what's happening in Slack so you can respond to them. So that brings us to our first persona.
So when we were putting this talk together, we were kind of getting confused ourselves because there's a lot of different perspectives that you can kind of come at these systems from. There's two different systems, ServiceNow and Slack. There's different users and different user experiences. There's users, admins, there's developer time things, there's installation time concerns. One of the things that we always do at ServiceNow, and I'm sure that Slack does too, when we're starting out to build a feature is we actually want to establish what's the user and what's the user experience that we're really driving after here. So basically, who am I and what am I trying to do? And you heard this echoed even in this morning's keynote with John. John mentioned, starting from the user experience, and I think that both of the Pats mentioned it as well. Really important. So we're going to try to use that here in our presentation to establish these personas to help you follow along with who you are and what you're trying to do as we get through the presentation. The first one is Corey. Corey works for a fake company called Cymic Corporation, who happens to be a joint customer of both Slack and ServiceNow. He's a developer. He develops on ServiceNow. What he wants to do is to build a Slack app for Cymic Corporation. So this is an app that's going to be specific to Cymic's use cases, and he wants to host it on his ServiceNow instance. This is something that's actually been really humbling for us to see and to hear from our customers that are actually doing this today, that this integration between ServiceNow and Slack is so in demand, but that our customers are willing to go out and spend the resources and the time to build it themselves, which we think is amazing. And it just really speaks to the power of both of these systems. So what Corey will do to build this application is he'll head out to the Slack API and start configuring his app. So he'll select what events he wants to receive in Slack. Those might be things like users messaging the bot, or typing / commands, or clicking buttons. Those events are going to get sent to an API endpoint that he specifies here. So he's going to specify a web address that's specific to his Cymic ServiceNow instance, and is basically a web API. Of course, Slack is going to generate him a unique set of credentials that represent that application. So he can use those credentials to verify as those events are coming in to his instance that they're actually coming from Slack, from his application. On the ServiceNow side, he's basically going to build a scripted REST API to implement that event endpoint. So it's going to receive the events from Slack. It'll have access to things like the verification token from Slack, which he'll use to validate those messages are legit. And then he can access information from the payload, who the user was, what their Slack team is, what the actual message was, or the message action, and then map that to who you are in ServiceNow and what you're trying to do, and respond back to the user. So from an architecture standpoint, then, we end up with something very similar to the diagram that Roo first showed, which is that Corey is going to go out to Slack, build this Cymic app, and the configuration and credentials reside on the Slack API. Slack will send events to ServiceNow, and basically he has a representation. The implementation of that app is hosted on his ServiceNow instance.
Thanks. Great. So this works really well for a company that has developers on staff, but that brings me to our next persona, Amy. Amy is a ServiceNow and Slack admin at her company, Acme Creamery, which is a dairy farm and ice cream shop. They don't have any developers on staff, but Amy is a pretty savvy end user. I feel like I'm double mic'd somehow. Amy's a pretty savvy end user, and she's friends with Corey, so she hears about this integration, and this is the experience that Amy is looking for. She just wants to be able to browse the Slack app directory or the ServiceNow equivalent and locate an app that she can just click to install. She doesn't want to have to worry about where her credentials live, where the app lives. She just wants her users to be able to find and interact with it on their Slack team. So I think you may be starting to see the problem here. If Amy at Acme Creamery has a unique instance at ServiceNow, and Simic and Corey's team have their own unique instance, then they have their own URLs. So if ServiceNow wanted to build an app to serve both of these customers, where would they host it? Or in Slack terms, what would they put in this box? I think that's you, actually.
So actually, when we first set out to build a Slack app, when we realized that, hey, we actually need to build a Slack app for our customers, I was asked to build one of our first prototypes with the Slack API. And so I landed on this page from the ServiceNow perspective, trying to build an app that's going to work for all of our customers. And I was immediately like, oh crap, we can't actually build an app because there's no one place for us that we can send these events to. Our customers, because of our multi-instance architecture, where you get your own database, your own isolated instance, your own URL, prevents you from using a system like this. So I went back to my team, said like, sorry, like it's not going to work. We're not going to be able to put an app out in the app directory. And that's when we reached out to Slack, and thankfully, Slack had already been starting to think about this problem.
Yes, we had definitely been noodling on this, and the solution that we came up with together, we're calling app blueprints. And so essentially, or at the baseline, what this allows is for an instance of ServiceNow, a unique instance of ServiceNow, to be specified at the time of install by the user instead of at the time of development by the third party, in this case, ServiceNow. So that box goes from looking like something like this to something with that's supposed to indicate a templatized URL. So ServiceNow supplies the route, in this case /Slack/events, and each customer that installs that app will supply their instance domain. Okay, so what does that mean architecturally? On the back end, what we're doing on the Slack side is every time the user comes to the app directory, a user like Amy, and clicks that big green button, we make a copy of the ServiceNow blueprint and generate a unique set of credentials for Amy's team. So you can see that on this install screen here, Amy is specifying her ServiceNow instance. She's got a credentials payload that she can copy, and then she's going to head on over to her ServiceNow settings page and paste those credentials in to complete kind of the install on both sides. If you're wondering why we would have a user do this manually instead of sending the credentials over the internet, we looked into many ways of doing that, but in fact, it's not safe, and we want users to be the stewards of their own tokens. So the recommended workflow for now is to manually copy and paste. Cool.
I think
Still me. All right. So like I mentioned, after Amy clicked copy and headed over to her ServiceNow instance, she, I think, jumped to the messaging integration configuration page where she'd paste her credentials in and click submit. And this allows for an architecture on the Slack side that more closely resembles the multi-instance architecture of ServiceNow. Amy's team at Acme Creamery can provision their own copy of the Now Actions app with their unique green credentials. And Corey over at Simic can provision their copy of the Now Actions app with their unique red credentials. All right.
Back one more.
Sorry.
So just to recap from ServiceNow perspective, how we deliver the application capability is basically as a plugin. So this is something that you can activate on your instance to get the implementation is just kind of like sitting there waiting to be activated, waiting to be configured with a particular copy of the blueprint definition. And so from a ServiceNow perspective, then what we end up with is kind of everything that we want, which is that first and foremost, our users get a first-class ServiceNow and Slack integration experience. Our admins get an easy, almost a click-to-install experience of the application on both sides. And we also get to maintain the integrity of our multi-instance architecture, which is something that's really important to us. It protects your data, the value that you get from being able to protect your feature functionality really comes into play if you think about upgrade scenarios. When we ServiceNow go to release new functionality as part of our Slack app, we're going to be updating the blueprint app definition. But because when you installed that, you copied down that app, your feature functionality is protected to and basically pinned to your instance until the time that you're ready to go out and basically opt into those new feature capabilities. So you'd be able to just reinstall the new app to get the new application capabilities. So you can take that on when you're ready to do that. And that mimics your same upgrade experience for when you upgrade to our new release. It's a decision that we put in your hands, and this goes along with that. So at this point, we're going to do a demo. We want to actually show what the blueprint configuration looks like on the Slack side, the experience that an admin would go through for installing that on ServiceNow. We want to go through the admin experience of setting up a notification into a channel and the approval flow using the Now Actions app. So I'm going to drive here, and Roo is going to walk me through this.
Thank you. Great. So like Silas mentioned, the Now Actions app is coming in the London release, which means if you went to the Slack app directory today and searched for ServiceNow, you wouldn't find it. But this is what it'll look like when it does come out. Just type ServiceNow, you'll see the Now Actions app show up, and you get that big green button.
There we go. If at any point any of these screens are not big enough for you to see, please call out and remind me to increase them.
Great. Sorry. OK, so this is the Slack app directory live in production. This is where you'd come to search to find ServiceNow. If you do that today, you won't get anything. All right, so when you click that big green button, jump over to the next tab, and you'll come to the install page that looks...
So just so we're clear, this is because we haven't yet released the London release.
Correct.
That this is not there. So once London's released, you'll be able to type ServiceNow here. When London is released.
All right, so whenever that is, after you click install, remember behind the scenes on the Slack side, we're making a copy of the Now Actions app and provisioning unique credentials for your team. You can see that we're impersonating Amy Admin, who we introduced you to before. She set up this integration on May 3rd because she was practicing for this demo. And there's some light configuration options here. You can change the name, add a short description, and change the icon of the app if you have white labeling for ServiceNow on your team. But you can also address the two workflow steps we've already talked about, which is provide your ServiceNow instance. Note that there's no route on the end of this. And then copy your credentials payload, which you can see is uniquely provisioned to your Acme Creamery team with unique ID. You've got a unique app ID, and then also the Blueprint app ID, which is sort of the parent app owned by ServiceNow. So Amy would copy those credentials to her clipboard and then jump over to her Now Actions settings page, where if this were her first time hitting this page, she'd click install and paste them right here. So although it's not exactly a one-click to install setup, it's pretty close. As we've already completed this workflow, you can see that there's one Slack workspace installed for the Acme Creamery team, and the credentials are sitting right there. So if Amy wants to verify that the app is set up on the Slack side, she can come here, check her instance URL, and click Submit. And then she'd head over to the Slack team where she can see the Now Actions app in the bottom left-hand corner under the apps. If Amy reaches out to the app,
This is a live demo, so of course it's going to take as long as possible.
she will be prompted to authenticate her ServiceNow identity in Slack. And here she can update her profile if she wants to change her name. And you'll see a banner at the top that says that her account has been linked. If you want to view all of your linked accounts in ServiceNow, you can head over to the profile, and under related links, you'll notice that Amy's Slack account is linked here. And you can see that she's got a unique Slack team ID and user ID under the provider user column.
Great. Thank you, Roo. So the identity mapping here is really important. This is something that Amy and other users of this integration will do one time, and basically we'll remember that mapping. So the next time that Amy comes back and messages the application or interacts with it, she won't have to re-authenticate again. And then you can see here that this is actually a one-to-many mapping of identity. So there could be multiple different workspaces that you could map your identity into to map who you are in Slack to who you are in ServiceNow. So the next admin experience that we want to take you through is what Amy would need to do to configure a notification. So let's take a look at that. So we have in her Slack team, there's a security incidents channel. Her security team has asked her to route high priority notifications into the channels because they're collaborating in the channel. That's where they are. They want to have that information directly where they can see it and take a quick read on it with whether it's something they need to look at quickly. They can converse about it. So let's take a look at how she would set that up. So Amy will come over to her messaging configuration. So under the standard system notification module, this is the same place where you would go to configure email notifications. There's a new messaging module and you can actually see that we're getting a new security notification right now. We'll take a look at that in just a minute. There's a new module here for configuring messaging. Right above this, the messaging integration configuration was the same place that we configured that JSON installation payload. Under the notifications, there's already configured a security incident. So let's take a look at that. This is the same notification record where you configure email notifications today. And these things are broken down in terms of when to send, meaning what's the criteria where this notification is going to fire. In this case, we wanted it to match against high priority incidents routed to the security group. Who will receive the message? This is where you might map it to a user or a group distribution group. And you can see that we've mapped it to configured this one for a new configuration called messaging channels. This is something where we're bringing in the channels from the workspace. So when the workspace was installed, we reached out using the Slack API and said, hey, I want to load all of the channels in that workspace to make them here available to configure. So we've already configured this for the security incidents channel. And you can see, because we're including the workspace identifier, if you have multiple different apps installed, you'd be able to select the different workspaces and you'd be able to select those channels. And finally, the what it will contain has a new configuration for messaging content. This is where we've configured the security notification content. So we'll open this record up. And like you might expect, it takes the record in question. So it's going to take an incident record, and it has a field picker where you can decide what's the information that I need to include in my Slack notification or in my message that's relevant for my team. You can also customize what the message will be, as well as in the message reference information from the event, from the record, and include that in crafting your notification. So in this case, I'm accessing the short description and using a special variable called URIref to provide a link back to the incident directly from the Slack notification. So now that we've looked at the configuration, let's take a look at the actual notification. So I'm still Amy admin, but I have access to the security incident channel. And you can see here that this was the new notification that came in while we were going through the configuration. You can see that I have the message that I specified. The identity of the message is coming in as the Now Actions app directly to my security channel where my team is collaborating. So they'll all see this notification. They can take a quick read on whether it's something they need to look at. They can coordinate who's going to be the person that looks at it. If they want to, they can deep link navigate directly from Slack to the incident. Cool. So that is an example of a non-interactive notification. We also built out support for interactive notification. So there was on the security notification that is configured as type simple. There's another configuration for buttons. This is where you could actually define actions to define in your message to allow users to interact with the notifications. And this is what we use to implement approvals. So I've got another user here. This is going to be our last persona. Actually, no, that's not true. We have another persona. This is Maria Manager. She's logged in on the desktop client for Slack. She's part of Acme Creamery. She's part of the security team, but she's a manager. And from time to time, she needs to approve requests from her employees for service catalog items. So in this case, you can see that she has already gone through the flow to link her ServiceNow account to her Slack account. And she has a notification here waiting for her of an approval for a developer laptop. So right here, this is coming into her directly from the Now Actions app as a direct message. And she can, if she has enough information here, she can approve it directly from here by interacting with this message. She could also reach out to Edwin and get some more information. If this wasn't something that they talked about or that, that she needs to talk over, she could do that right here from Slack as well. And then, of course, she's going to have a link out to that approval request, where if she needs to get out to ServiceNow and more context around the request, then she has an easy way to get to that record. So let's take a look at how she would configure this approval. So once Maria has linked her account to Slack, she can actually direct navigate right here from the notification message. So you can see that the app now knows that she's Maria Manager in Slack and has provided her a link to her notification preferences. So there's a new notification channel. Because we've installed the Acme Creamery workspace into this ServiceNow instance, there's a new notification channel for that workspace. So she can come in here and enable notifications to be received in her Slack team. She can keep email also for some notifications. She can choose on a per message basis, on a per notification type basis. So to get the approval requests routed through Slack, she'll come in here to the approvals and select the catalog approval request and say, hey, I don't want to receive this in email anymore. I want to receive it via Slack. And the next time somebody requests something from the service catalog from her team, she'll get those notifications for approvals as a DM right in her Slack console. So we're pretty excited about this app and this integration. And we want to say that we're not done with it by any means. We're going to continue to invest in this capability and continue to build out the feature functionality, because I think we can all kind of imagine in the future just how rich of an integration between our two systems, how powerful that could be in enabling all of those like quick read, quick interaction user experiences and interactions with ServiceNow right from your Slack collaboration experience. All right, so we're going to switch back. Great. Okay, now this is the last persona. So up to now, we've talked about users, we've talked about admins, we've even talked about developers. This is a different type of developer. This is what we would call a third-party developer. So if you're sitting in the audience and you're thinking like, hey, I don't work for ServiceNow, I don't work for Acme Creamery or Cymic or even Slack, I'm a third-party developer. And if my goal is to build a Slack app that I can offer to joint customers of both ServiceNow and Slack, is there anything here for me? And we're happy to say that, yeah, absolutely. The really nice thing about the way that we built this is that there's no architectural difference between what you would do to build an app and host it in our store and put it in the Slack directory in terms of like how those messages would flow. You can make use of the identity binding framework that maps ServiceNow identities to who you are in Slack. And you can also make use of our messaging actions framework, which is how we're implementing things like those interactive approvals. You can implement your own messaging actions or use ours. And the really nice thing is here that once you do this, if you're using the blueprint functionality, like once it's widely available, then you'll be able to list your app in both our ServiceNow store and in the Slack app directory, which is really going to boost the discoverability of your app and your feature functionality. And there's no reason from an architecture standpoint why multiple apps using this system can't exist on the same ServiceNow instance, because we built with exactly that use case in mind.
Great. So from the Slack side, app blueprints in this capacity, although if you search our docs, you will find some information about blueprints. App blueprints like this are not available through api.slack.com to everyone just yet. But if you're a developer sitting in the audience and you said to yourself, yes, this last persona sounds like me, we'd love to hear from you. Our business development team is looking for folks to partner with as we continue to flesh out this functionality. I've also included on our resources slide just a few getting started pages on building apps on Slack. And we love tweeting, so feel free to tweet at us.
Doesn't Slack have a policy of responding to every tweet sent to Slack?
Yes, we do.
I heard that somewhere. On the ServiceNow side, there's a lot of great platform resources at our developer site. If you're not familiar with that, you can get documentation about our developer program. You can actually get an instance of ServiceNow and start developing apps on ServiceNow for free. So that's a really great resource. Also be on the lookout for our release notes. When we release London, we'll include information about this app and this functionality in our documentation, and we'd encourage you to take a look at that. I also want to mention that if you're interested to go deeper on the Now Actions app and the messaging actions framework, and how to really, really more of a deeper dive into that functionality, there's a session here, CCB0588, that's put together by Russ Chadwick and Jake Berman, who actually built this Now Actions app for us. They're a part of our platform notifications team. That talk is immediately after this one in a different room, but it's in about 20 minutes or so. So I'd encourage you to attend that if possible. And I think with that, we're ready for some questions if you have them.
Yeah.
All the way in the back. So the question was, does the app already have the infrastructure to support slash commands with it? And I'm looking for the head nod from Russ. No, not yet. That's definitely something that we're interested in looking into. It's something that we did look into, and it didn't make the cut for our London release, but it's definitely something that's very interesting to us.
And I would add that the first scenario we talked through with Corey being the developer for your team, your instance, there's no reason that internal integration workflow can't continue. So if you have specific needs, slash command needs, you can continue to build them out on your own for now. Thanks.
There was another question here.
This release, would we be able to open instance, for example, using Slack, or is that coming later?
I don't think so in this release, but also, again, that's something that we're very interested in looking into. This talk is also very focused on the Now Actions app. We have another app being released that goes along with our virtual agent capability. And I believe that's more of the use case that would be targeted towards that virtual agent application. We'll go here next, sorry.
Yeah, you call him.
Okay.
So how do you police the users, the handle for your users versus Slack?
Yeah, actually, if I could actually show you that
Oh, yeah.
real quick. So Maria Manager can go here to her profile and view her linked accounts. This is the actual mapping record. So we're mapping here her ServiceNow user account, Maria Manager, to basically the IDs for her Slack account. So this is the Slack team ID and the Slack user ID.
How do you populate this?
Oh, this is populated when the user types a message to the Now Actions app. You can see it here. This click to authenticate is a link that takes you to ServiceNow, and you sign in as yourself on ServiceNow, and then we'll link your account because now we know who you are in ServiceNow, and this link is specific to you in Slack, so we know we can create that linkage.
On the back end, I think ServiceNow is calling a Slack API to get the user credentials. Is that right?
I don't think so. I think we already have enough information here from the Slack events to be able to know who you are, what your Slack user ID is. There's another question here.
Is it finance with domain separation?
I'm going to punt that one over to Russ, who's sitting right here. Do you want to, feel free, Russ, to stand up. Russ is going to be doing that next talk on the Now Actions app.
Yeah, I have a talk coming up after this where we're going to do a deeper dive on making your own custom Slack app. This plays well with domain separation.
I see you behind there.
Go ahead.
What about conversation history? Like if I have a certain criteria that's met in ServiceNow, I want to return all the conversation history from that channel to that record in ServiceNow.
Isn't that a use case that you're going to show building on?
You would do that two different ways. One would be to subscribe to the messaging channels event in a custom app, and then you could get those in real time. Or if you need to do it on demand, you would call the Slack API, and you would have to have the right scope on your app, on your Slack app, and you could pull up the history of the whole channel.
I think they're talking about your timestamp.
Yeah, so our timestamp is it's like 9 digits and then a dot and then 9 more digits. So if you want to convert that to a human readable timestamp or a timestamp of some other format, I think that would have to happen on the ServiceNow side.
Yeah, so that does represent the time of that message. It's just in Unix epoch time. And so it's the number of milliseconds since 1970, I think. So there's APIs, and you can do that with the glide date time API as well as to convert that into a human readable date format. Question here.
Do users need any special roles to use the Slack or things like ServiceNow? And then you do approvals within the Slack. Do they have that special role?
So the question is, do you need special roles to actually use this application and this linkage? Was that the question? No, you don't need any special role. You need to have a ServiceNow account, and even to set up the approvals, basically like an approval that would normally get routed to you anyway via email is perfectly eligible to get routed to you through Slack if that's your preference.
And on the Slack side, in terms of setting up the app and getting going, it is configurable per team who's allowed to install apps. Some teams just allow everyone, and other teams have like app administrators or just allow the owner of the team. But as a user, if you see a message from an app, you can interact with it. With the exception of our single and multi-channel guest examples, who are the restricted users, they wouldn't be able to use some of the interactive capabilities unless permitted by an admin, but those are very small use cases. So in general, regular users, if you can see a message, you can click on it.
Here in the front. So the question is, how will the approval work for delegates? I believe, and Russ, you could back me up on this, but I believe that the way that that would work is that the delegate system is all contained on ServiceNow. So as far as like when the system is deciding who actually needs to get that notification, that's the point that the messaging channel would be consulted and route that notification to the right place. I'm looking for a head nod.
Yeah, behind the scenes, we didn't show what configures this, but anytime that you configure action buttons, you're also defining a script that runs. And so you would see a scripted code that says something along the lines of, if button equals approve, do this. If button equals reject, do this. And we're impersonating this user before we start that script. So anything that normally applies to approvals through emails or any other means would apply here.
Will the Now Action app be part of the base platform in London, or is this a paid subscription app that's on top of it?
Yeah, so the question is this included with platform or a separate license? And this is, I'm happy to say this is included in our platform.
Is there for group notifications?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Group notifications or channel messages?
Yeah, that's what was our the first example here. So the idea here is that you're not sending this notification to a particular user. So the question is, are there group notifications? The idea here with this notification is that the users that this notification should go to are already here in this channel, because that's where their team is, or whoever that notification is relevant for, are already they've already joined that channel. So it's more on a channel basis that the notification is going into the channel, and there can be many users in the channel. Yeah. So I think the question was, can you include some of Slack's like @here type interactions in our messages? And yeah.
Yeah, you just define that in the messaging content. It's text that's treated specially by Slack when they receive it.
Yeah, so the markdown rules should apply to the text that you're filling out, including like stars for bold, underlines for italics. Yeah, I don't know if I'm recalling it exactly correctly, but I believe you need like a less than sign before the @ to signify, and that's specified on the api.slack.com documentation.
Cool. Let's do a couple more questions. So I'll get to you next, all the way in the back. Yeah, so the question is, will you be able to open an incident here from Slack? Was that the question? Or if I didn't get it right, maybe you can repeat it. Yeah. Yeah, I think that, so the question is, would you be able to quickly open an incident from Slack? And I think that that's something that we're interested in, and I could see that being built out as a / command potentially, or maybe something different, using something like your dialogues function in Slack, which is like a lightweight little user interface in Slack where you can prompt for some information. So we don't have that yet, but it's something that we'd be interested to hear if you're, how interested you are in that. I promised I'd come back to you. So what was your question?
Is there any limitation to a private channel?
I'm sorry?
Any limitations for a private channel?
Yeah, great question. So the question is, are there any limitations with private channels in Slack? And yes, we don't actually get the private channels from the Slack API, I think. So these notifications can go to public channels and not currently to private channels. All the way in the back, this will probably be our last question, and then feel free to come up and talk to us afterwards.
Is there a way to get the action from Slack
So the question is, can you add a comment to like this notification right here from Slack? Not currently, but again, that's one of the things that we're interested in doing is building out like the enrichment of your interaction with these notifications. So, okay, so thank you so much for attending our talk. We're really happy to speak to you about this today. Feel free to come up and talk to us later.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.